This little car has a lot of history. Back in the early 90s, I set a world record at Bonneville with it. And it was like a 4 or 5 year program trying to get it that last few miles an hour quicker than the record, you know. And finally we accomplished it in 1992. But this is a 1929 Ford. It's extensively modified beneath the surface because the outside of the car, according to the rules, had to be the way they built it. And it's powered now by a 1951 Mercury V8 engine, which is called a flathead. And it's got, it started out being 85 horsepower from the factory. And when we got done modifying it, it was making 335. So it really, you know, pumped it up. But you gotta always remember, in this particular class, this is an antique. So when you're building an engine up, you can't squeeze too much horsepower out of it, because if you do, it's gonna break. So it was a balancing act. We blew a couple of them up, you know, and had a couple of really exciting spins on the salt. But as it turned out, you know, we stepped with the program and finally got there, made it work. So you can see this when you come in here anytime. All right, we're in the drag racing section of the museum right now, and this has a special meaning to me because I was always a drag racer, drag racing first. And the car on your right is what they call a front engine dragster. That was a car that I ran back in the 1960s. And the top speed on that from a dead stop in a quarter mile was about 160 miles an hour. And it was, you know, that was really, really fast back then. And then as time moved on, you know, I got away from these cars and got into gas coupes and sedans and full-bodied cars, but the rest of the world kept moving. And there was a point in time when these cars switched from gasoline and started burning other fuels like methanol and then eventually nitromethanine and a few others. And for a while, the sanctioning body, NHRA, outlawed special fuels. They wanted everybody to go back to gasoline, and they wanted the cars to be slower because they were afraid somebody was going to get killed. And so racers being racers said, well, if we can't run fuel, we just need more horsepower. So if one engine's good, then two's got to be better. And they built cars like this, and I think this thing is the most fascinating car here in the museum. It is a twin-engine dragster, but it has a small, what they call competition coupe body on the back of it, so it could be run in two different classes. These cars, in their time, ran in excess of 185 miles an hour. They were approaching 200 when NHRA came back and said, okay, you're going fast anyway, we might as well let you use fuel. And of course, then it evolved into this kind of a car, which is a rear engine dragster, much safer because all the explosions are going to be behind you. And now they run almost 10,000 horsepower and accelerate from a dead stop in a quarter mile to 320 miles an hour. It's a phenomenal thing even to hear, much less see. That's why this, to me, is the most exciting part of the museum. As you know, in this museum, we have a real anchor in stock car racing. So there's a lot of stock cars here. In fact, there's 47 cars in this museum as you go through. But one of the most interesting stock cars, I think, is this 1956 Chrysler 300. These cars dominated stock car racing in the early 50s, well, the mid 50s really, 55 through 57. And this particular one was a Tim Flock car, was sponsored by Mercury Marine. And these cars from the factory actually produced 1 horsepower for every cubic inch, which was a real breakthrough for engine horsepower. And this is a production car. Right from the factory in 1956, you could buy this from a dealer without the fancy paint job. Buy it from the dealer, go down to Daytona Beach on the Salt, and run 155, 156 miles an hour. These things were really fast. And Tim Flock, who was the driver of this particular car, was a national champion in 55. 1956, he won some races. But the most important thing was that he, to this day, is the winningest driver ever in stock car racing on the one account. The number of races the number of race wins per starts with Tim is higher than anybody else's. He had a short career, but a very, very productive one. And this car would be his signpost. This is the one that he was so well known for. And I suppose you're looking over here. This is Jocko Flocko. That's a memory of one of Tim's favorite stunts. He actually took a little monkey in the car with him on the racetrack and ran several races with him in the car. And one day the monkey decided that was all he was going to do, and he got loose inside the car and started to attack Tim while he was driving. And Tim had to pull in the pits, stop and get the monkey out and get back on the racetrack. So it has some history. Everybody asked about old Jocko here. So in the museum, we've talked about stock cars, we've talked about drag cars, we talked about land speed record cars, and this is what we call the class open wheel cars. And these start at the bottom with these midgets and go all the way to Indy cars, as you saw earlier. So this particular car was driven by current stock car star Ryan Newman. He won the United States Auto Club National Championship in this car, and he also won the Sprint Car Championship, which is a slightly larger car. This has a little 4-cylinder engine in it, and it makes tons of horsepower. In fact, of all the oval track cars that are run, these things are probably the most overpowered cars on the circuit. They're very maneuverable, they're very fast, and they have very, very, very tenacious abilities when it comes to an aggressive type driver driving one of these things can get himself in really, really big trouble because he has so much horsepower and he's trying to move in and out of the traffic. And Newman was as good as it got. Right now we're in the Goodyear Theater in the museum, and during the day, all through the week, we run racing films for the people that are visiting the museum. And we cover mostly stock car racing, but we have some other drag racing films as well. So this is a nice little intermission in your visit when you come to the museum, because it gives you a chance to sit down and just get a little bit more history. This particular automobile was run at the Daytona 24 Hours, the sports car race in Daytona, and also a lot of the other road racing in that particular series of years. You know, the car is called a Crawford. It is actually built right here in Denver, North Carolina. This particular car is so significant because back in, I forget what year it was, but they decided they were going to run this in the 24 hours. It was built here, shipped to Daytona. Tony Stewart, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and Elliott Forbes Robinson drove this car. They led almost the entire race. And they got down to about 20 minutes from the end. And they had a lap on the field. 2.5 mile lead. And the rear suspension broke. And they tried to fix it. They lost some time in the pits. They did some really immediate repairs, emergency repairs, and wound up losing the race to, I can't remember who won it. The big story was that these guys had everybody covered. So it went on, they ran a few more races that year, and eventually Tony and Elliot Forbes Robinson ran it in an event, I think it was in Ohio, at one of the road courses there, and Tony won with it. So it avenged itself, but it was a really quick, nimble sports car, and it was built right here in North Carolina, 20 minutes away from